It's that time. Everything and anything basketball, presented by The Outrage. With Kajan Thiru and host Spencer Byers, this is Polar Opposites.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Polar Opposites. Spencer Byers, Kajan, Thiru, Danny Castelum, and Cage. We almost recorded last night after the Raptors game. Of course, you're working for the MLSE, the great MLSE, the multi-million-dollar corporation, MLSE.
Multi-million-dollar corporation? Yeah, great. There's room for debate on that.
Not with the way they act with the Toronto Blue Jays, but that's not this show. We'll let Al write about that tomorrow. But anyway, with that, thank goodness we didn't, because as we would have probably recorded last night, we would have fallen into James Harden was finally traded last night. So if you didn't, are you just hearing this now this morning as we record this at about midday, Tuesday on Halloween, October 31st? We fell backwards into this because this happened at like 10:30 last night. This did not happen at like 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock before a game. This happened basically after all of the games were started or finished, depending on what time zone you're in. So the Philadelphia 76ers get Marcus Morris, Nicholas Batum, Robert Covington, Kenyon Martin Jr., a 2026 protected Clippers first-round pick via Oklahoma City, a 2028 Clippers first-round pick that is unprotected, 21 pick swap in 2029, meaning whichever pick is better will go to the Clippers, go to the Philadelphia, pardon me. So whatever pick is better, the Philadelphia 76ers will swap and take. And 2 second-round picks in 2024 and 2029. So they get a bunch of assets for a guy who didn't want to be there openly since 3 months ago. The Clippers get James Harden, PJ Tucker, and Filip Petrusev. Petrusev, obviously, you and I talked about during the Serbia World Cup video against Canada. PJ Tucker with James Harden. They've now been together in, if I'm not mistaken, Cage, they've been together in Houston. Yep. They were together, obviously, here in Philly, and now they're going to be together back in Los Angeles. And the Oklahoma... What?
PJ Tucker is basically James Harden's personal bodyguard at this point.
Yeah, and then the Thunder somehow got in here. I'm not exactly sure where the Thunder kind of fit into this, but the Thunder are receiving a 2027 pick swap from the Clippers. So the Clippers technically up, I think that's 4 first-round picks, if I'm not mistaken. But regardless of that,
of course, Presti had to get involved in this.
Of course, and get more draft picks, because that's what they needed, Cage. If the Oklahoma City Thunder needed one more thing, Cage, it was more first-round draft picks, more pick swaps. But anyway, so Cage, let's look at it from a Sixers perspective first. A guy who openly didn't want to play for you, openly didn't come to practice for you, didn't put in any effort after saying he was gonna, which is what upset me the most, and as we all know, I had a mini rant about it, that I was very upset that Harden kind of went back on his word by saying, I am going to play basketball, I'm going to do my job, and then actively didn't do his job and didn't play basketball. But before I rehash that, he now will go to his desired location in Los Angeles, but the return they got for him, I think the set of players leaves something to be desired, but I think the draft capital they got, I think, is very important, because now either they can use some of this draft capital to go get another star of some description if they want to build around Embiid, or if Joel Embiid is telling them that maybe he wants to also leave and try to find a championship somewhere else, then you trade him at the deadline, or maybe even later this season, and you grab more draft capital and add to what you've just gotten here for James Harden. And again, a guy who did not want to be in Philadelphia. So you basically got all these picks for nothing, because he was not going to resign after this year anyway, implying he was going to play for him. So, Cage, what do you make of this trade for Philadelphia?
Well, in terms of like the Joel Embiid situation, if Embiid, if this was a precursor to Embiid demanding a trade, we would have known about this by now. It would have came out. But I think why it was a little bit easier for them to get to trade Harden right now. One, he didn't want to be there, but two, and I think you're gonna love what I'm about to say, Tyrese Maxey's emergence. Because yes, it's only been 3 games, but I'm gonna say it might be bold, but he looks like he could be a co-star. Like he could be like that co-star Embiid needs. Because in terms of Embiid's slow, burgeoning style of play, then you got like a blur like Maxey who can hit step backs. He's improved his handle over the offseason and can do it and has turned into a better playmaker, and he's done it well at both ends of the floor so far. I saw him at Scotiabank Arena this past Saturday, and he torched Toronto for 34. I think his continued emergence, had made it a lot easier to trade away Harden, because the longer Harden was on that roster, would have taken away from Maxey's touches. And people are kind of saying like, yeah, the draft capital is good, but the players they got back weren't the greatest. Well, for one, this clears up like $50 to $60 million of cap space for next offseason in case they want to get someone, or grab a star, or trade for a star or a third star. But they also got depth. Especially like you need some of those role players come like playoff time that can guard the Jason Tatums, the Jaylen Browns, the LeBron James, the Giannis's. You got Nick Batum and Robert Covington, who are great defenders. Covington being back in Philadelphia. KJ Martin can have a better role there in Philly. Because their backup center is Paul Reed. And then Marcus Morris Sr. can finally have a role there to play and provide a scoring punch off the bench. So to sum all of this up, a great pickup, a great job by Daryl Morey and the Sixers getting some value back for Harden, who did not want to be there. And I think it looks like they're trying to build around Embiid and Maxey, and I'm all for it, because I think Max. I think for me personally, Tyrese Maxey. They found a gem in Tyrese Maxey, and they got to give him the keys to being the lead guard, and this trade sort of signifies that.
I agree with you, kid, but I think they still need another guard to play with Maxey. And if that's an off-ball guard or another guy who can play on the ball, because I will be honest, I don't think Kelly Oubre Jr. is that guy. I don't think Patrick Beverley's that guy. Danny Green, obviously not that guy.
Well,
I don't think Anthony Melton's that guy. Like I don't really like any of their other guard options as a starter. All of these guys are great off the bench. Kelly Oubre's great off the bench. Patrick Beverley's great off the bench. Danny Green, you can argue his value at this point in his career, but regardless, Anthony Melton, great player off the bench. You need that other starting guard. And I don't know if they're going to use all of the bench pieces they have from obviously the team they had before this trade and now the team they have after this trade. And some of the draft capital they've got. But I think they need to find another guard to fit into this team to be able to say they can compete. Because, Cage, even with all that depth, can this team compete with Boston and the Bucks? Because if they can't, then what's the point? Because that's what this team is looking at right now. The 76ers are not looking at Miami or is it Cleveland, they're looking at Milwaukee and Boston. How can we beat them? And I think today we cannot say definitively in any real way, breaking it down roster versus roster. And obviously, you still have to play the games. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying it is unlikely that the 76ers built currently can beat either the Boston Celtics or the Milwaukee Bucks. And you got to play one of them in the second round. You might have to play both of them on your way to a finals bid. So you need to find a way to beat them. So they need at least one more starting guard. And then this team looks great. Because now they have the bench as well.
And I think that's kind of what the draft capital is for, to trade for a guard. There is one part of the Sixers that's kind of flown under the radar in spite of the contract that he has. But Tobias Harris has looked better offensively to start things off under Nick Nurse. So if he can go back to being a 20-point per game scorer and contribute in the way he did last season, in which he was doing a little bit of everything, then call me crazy, Spence, but I kind of like the Sixers team as it is. Like, I think one, the distraction and the drama is now gone, which is a big help. They can focus on playing basketball unless Joel Embiid demands a trade. They can focus on basketball now. They got good depth at the wing position, and I know having a guard is big. Like, having guard depth as starting guard would be great, but this is also a wings league.
Okay, but
Come playoff time, you gotta, like, it's the wings that will go off unless you're, or the centers if you're Jokic and Embiid. It's the wings that are going to. It's the superstar wings that are gonna carry come postseason time. So maybe regular season wise, yeah, you might need a starting guard here or there, but come playoff time, I'm not sure if that will matter as much. So
okay,
it remains to be
go ahead.
it remains to be seen. But I kind of like how the Sixers team looks now.
Why I disagree with you. Why I disagree, and I disagree with you I'll say at an utmost degree right now, is because of who they traded with. When you look at this Clippers roster, like now with James Harden, you have a backcourt of James Harden, Russell Westbrook, technically Paul George, but if you want to play him at a 3 and quiet the 4, I'm not sure it really matters. Terrence Mann, Bones Highland. Like, there's so many good guards on Los Angeles. You couldn't have got one of them? Not even like one of the kids, like Josh Primo, the Canadian, who obviously had some off the court issues, which got him out of San Antonio, or Brandon Boston, former Kentucky Wildcat. Like, and again, I'm not saying any, like, Bones has had a really good start. I'm not saying Brandon Boston's a game changer. I'm not saying Josh Primo's a game changer, but just getting a guard, even a young guard, a guy you can develop. And again, very to be seen if great Nick Nurse could develop a young guard, as he had problems with Malachi Flynn in Toronto. But that again remains to be seen.
Although I think Jaden Springer has had his moments, like to start off the season. Maybe he could be that one kid that, I wouldn't say has a breakout year, like averages 15, but like can carve himself a role on the Sixers team.
I just think, Cage, there's so many talented young guys on this Clippers team that you could have got one of them. And I'm not saying, of course, you're going to get a bunch of them because that's unrealistic, but you could have gotten more than just Kenyon Martin Jr. as the young pieces in that deal. With the veterans they got, Robert Covington and Marcus Morris and etc. I just feel like they could have gotten some better value out of the guys they got. because I feel like there's got to be something else coming from the Philadelphia side of things here. Because again, I just do not see a real possibility of them beating Milwaukee or Boston with the way they're currently constructed. I think they'll win their first round series rather easily, but I just don't know if they will be able to keep up with the Bucks or the Celtics. And obviously, again, we're still a mile away from that playoffs. And maybe I'm wrong, and I'm okay with that. I'll admit it if it happens for Boston or the Milwaukee if they beat them in the second round. But I just don't have a whole lot of confidence right now in what the Sixers have built. But before we continue to we go round and round. Let's move over now to the Clippers side of things. They get James Harden, PJ Tucker, and Philip Petrusev, and then again they add Harden to a guard room of guys like technically Paul George, but we'll call him a forward. So Bones Highland, Russell Westbrook, even Norman Powell. I don't know if I said Bones Highland, but Bones Highland, Terrence Mann. A lot of really talented guards in Los Angeles, and they had depth in spades, so they could make a trade like this, just basically trading depth. And now you got to think, Cage, their starting lineup will probably be Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and then Zubac as the center. I mean, I'm not sure as starting lineups go. That might be a top 3 to 4 starting lineup in the league right now. Even with the players they are now, with the way Russell Westbrook is now, with the way James Harden is now.
See, I think one of Harden or Westbrook will go to the bench.
Which would be Westbrook, you'd expect.
Yeah, and I think what the way the Clippers have raved about Terrence Mann, I don't see him going to the bench. And I think like on a team where there's so many scorers at hand, like Harden's lost a step in terms of like his scoring, but he can still score. Kawhi and PG are bucket getters. Can put the ball in the bucket. You got a center that knows his role and stays in his lane, and Visa Zubac, and then a great backup center, Mason Plumlee. I think there's such a thing as too many mouths to feed in like a starting lineup, which in that case, man would be perfect to play as the starting two because he doesn't really need that much touches to succeed. He can do all the dirty work. And I think Westbrook off the bench could be a better thing. Or it could be Harden off the bench. It depends on what the Clippers want to do to start off game. Do you want to push the pace? Do you want to slow it down, make it a half-court game? If you slow it down and make it a half-court game, Harden's better off starting. If you want to push the pace, Westbrook's your guy. Because Westbrook has looked good as the starting point guard for the Clippers ever since he switched jerseys at Crypto.com Arena. They do have an embarrassment of riches in terms of depth at the guard position. But 2 questions.
Oh, go ahead.
2 questions. Can they focus on just basketball and no outside noise? And can they stay healthy? Because the Clippers haven't proved that they can do either. Or haven't proved that they can do both. And for me, it's on paper, this Clippers team could go all the way. But they've fallen short so many times in the Kawhi PG era. So it's like, I have to you got to wait and see at this point. Can they put their egos aside? Can Harden, Westbrook, Kawhi, PG, can guys who think they deserve bigger roles, can they put their egos aside and win a championship? That to me is the bigger question.
Well, I think Westbrook already has in Los Angeles with obviously the Clippers. I think he's kind of moved into that role of knowing that he's not where he maybe wants to be in his career, but he's where he's gonna be kind of in his career. But Cage, I have to tell you something here. So
What?
the Clippers starting lineup the last 3 games before this trade was Russell Westbrook, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Robert Covington, and Zubac, with Bones Highland and Norman Powell being the backup guards. Trey Mann has even played, or Terrence Mann, pardon me, because I know Trey Mann's a different individual. Terrence Mann hasn't even played yet.
Oh, that's because he's been hurt.
Exactly. So now you got to find a way to fit Terrence Mann, who hasn't played yet, and James Harden, who hasn't played yet. So I feel like one of them has to start with Westbrook in the starting lineup. And maybe you're right, and they flip flop, not Mann, but they flip flop between Harden and Westbrook. But I just don't see Tyronn Lue doing that. I think Tyronn Lue is going to see it as I want my best players on the floor for as long as I can have them on the floor. And if that means I got to play Westbrook, Harden, George, and Kawhi, that's what I got to do. And he's going to live with what those guys will do, which is some bad shots, which is some stagnant offense at times, because they are all bucket getters. But I think with the way Westbrook's played with the Clippers, I think you can have confidence that will work, because he has not been taking the amount of shots we're used to seeing him take. Like, he had 4 points in one of the 3 games they played this season, Case. Like, Westbrook has really moved into his role of being, okay, I am the facilitator between Kawhi and Paul. I am not the main bucket getter. I don't need to be, so why am I trying to be? Which I do think is why he will start over James if that is the way it works. Not because James Harden's not a good passer. He led the league last year in assists. But because of the role Westbrook plays in the offense, I do think that the team will probably stick with Westbrook over his former teammate in a couple of locations in James Harden.
I'm going to throw it back to the 2011-2012 Thunder, because they're Westbrook at the 1, KD at the 3, and Thabo Cephalosha at the 2. And they had Harden coming off the bench. Now everybody knew, even 11 years ago, Harden was clearly the better player over Cephalosha. But Cephalosha brought a role. But what that Thunder lineup really needed was not too much scoring, because they already had that in Westbrook and Durant. And Ibaka could score a little bit, along with their shot blocking presence. They needed someone who can be a 3-and-D guy. And Cephalosha was that. So I think it doesn't, to me, it doesn't come down to there's such a thing as having too much talent in a starting lineup because of egos. And I know Westbrook, to his credit, has done a great job of knowing his role. But we haven't seen James Harden do it to that degree, because he's going to have to sacrifice a lot more than he did in Philly. Now with Kawhi and PG on the Clippers. So maybe he's got to embrace going back to that OKC role and being that 6th man. And honestly, I'm with you. I'd rather see Russell Westbrook in the starting lineup, because their offense has looked good with Westbrook pushing the pace, being the point guard that the Clippers need. And you've said you don't see Ty Lue making that change and having Mann in the starting lineup, but they've raved about him. You can't rave about a guy like that and to the point where you're not willing to trade him anywhere and have him come off the bench.
But I just don't know if he fits the Robert Covington role. Is he going to be that guy? Are they going to make Norman Powell play that role now and be more of that kind of shooting guard, small forward-esque player?
They need a guy who can hit shots and can defend and do all the little things. And I think Terrence Mann can do that. Terrence Mann can fill that Thabo Cephalosha role like he did in years ago with the Thunder. because I think right now the Clippers need a Thabo Cephalosha type role with the amount of scoring that's in that starting lineup.
Who knows that Flosh would get so many comments around the show, by golly. The guy hasn't played in the NBA in probably 8 years. Anyway. I just don't know if Man's nailed in that spot. Because again, Bones Highlands played great this year. And he'd be a great shooting guard right now. He's averaging the third most points on the team. Hasn't started a game yet. Shooting really well percentage-wise from the field and from three. I just don't know if Terrence Mann is nailed in my mind as that guy for the Clippers. Maybe he is with the Clippers. Maybe inside that locker room they know Terrence Mann, when he comes back will be the guy. But I just don't know that with the way this season started for Norman Powell, for Bones Highland. And then obviously when they get James Harden coming in, I'm not convinced that it's going to be Mann. I'm not saying it won't be. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just not convinced at this point that's the way this is going to go. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like the Clippers are a team that you're going to see a lot of lineups a lot of different nights. I could see lineups where Mann's in and Harden's out. I can see lineups where Harden's in, Westbrook's out. I can see lineups where Mann's out, Harden's in, or Westbrook are in. I can see lineups where they're both out, and you see Bones Highland start. The Clippers are one of the few teams in the league right now where they have so many talented players that you could genuinely start a lot of them in certain situations depending on the look you want to give the opponent. And there are not a whole lot of teams that can say that right now. With either talent of bench or talent of starters in certain positions. But obviously with injury concerns, we all know about with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and even with James Harden and arguably with Russell Westbrook, even though Russell Westbrook has always been seen as an Iron Man, he's getting older, and with that almost always comes injuries. So I guess we're just going to have to see what the Clippers look like after this trade, what the Philadelphia 76ers look at after this trade, and one more time, Sam Presti. If I could give you an applause, Sam, you'd get one. How you keep getting in these random 3-team trades and getting a draft pick, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. They technically gave up a 2026 first-round pick, but it's protected. So even if it's a top 10 pick, they're probably going to get it back. And they get a pick swap out of it from the Clippers in 2027 when Kawhi Leonard's going to be retired because of knee injuries. So how about that, Cage? How about that, Sam Presti, continuing to show why he's such a good executive down there in Oklahoma City?
There you go. But let me ask you a real question here. How would you feel about the Thunder if it was Karl Anthony Towns who demands a trade and they give up those first-round draft picks just to get it?
I would be disgusted with Sam Presti. But I also know, Cage, and that Sam Presti's not an idiot and knows he doesn't need the absolute cancer that is Karl Anthony Towns. I know Sam Presti knows what his team is made of and does not need to trade for an absolute bum like Karl Anthony Towns. Like a slow, sluggish, anti-defense guy who you don't even know where he's going to play at this point, center or power forward. Because you got Chet Holmgren, who is fantastic.
Folks, if you're tuning into Polar Opposites for the first time and you're hearing this, let me just state the obvious. Spencer Myers is not a fan of Karl Anthony Towns.
This show, we have some players we like and some players we don't like. Cage and I, we love Tyrese Halliburton. We love Dylan Brooks. Now because of the World Cup, might I add, not because of his NBA play. But anyway, so Dylan Brooks been added to the top players list. Tyrese Halliburton added to the players list. Tyrese Maxey on our favorite players list.
Yep.
Among others. Players we don't like. Rudy Gobert. Karl Anthony Towns. Anybody else, Gage? Anybody else? Anybody else in particular?
Well, you hate Jimmy Butler. I don't mind him.
No comment on Jimmy Butler. I'm just not going to do that right now. We're not going to have that conversation right now. No comment on Jimmy Butler.
Oh, man. Who else? I don't know how you feel about Julius Randle, but I'm not a fan.
I know you're not a fan of Julius Randle. I know you are definitely a anti-Randle fan down there if you were a Knickerbocker fan.
Well, because Jalen Brunson hasn't gotten the respect he deserves.
In fairness. So it's not really Randle's fault It's just that Brunson's definitely been kind of not seen as a better player. When, in my opinion, Brunson is a better player. Just there's so many good guards. I don't think he gets the credit because of that kind of thing. Where there's not as many good forwards, so Randall gets propped up that way. I do think that
But
does
Randall
happen.
doesn't perform in the postseason. That's the biggest issue for me.
And that remains to be seen. But in fairness, the Knicks have had a whole lot of success in the postseason, so I don't really think that's all in fairness on Julius Randle. But regardless,
Who else? Who else do we absolutely despise?
not a whole lot of guys anymore, Cage. Not a whole lot of guys. I don't think.
Huh.
I mean, without looking through all the rosters, Cage, I can't think of anybody else that's like I don't like Trae Young. I'm not a big fan of Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan, or as one of our professors once said, DeMar DeFrozen.
DeMar DeFrozen.
That was a classic, Cage. You and I both chuckled when he said that one.
And as soon as he said that, he became defrosted.
Yeah, ironically, those two things did correlate. So maybe it's all Ray's fault. Anyway, so now we will move on from players that we like / don't like, and the Harden trade to the NBA season. So more games going on last night. Obviously, Kajan at the Raptors game last night. I watched some of the Raptors game while I was cooking. I watched some of the Celtics game while I was cooking.
See, I had to work it, so I had to see that travesty. Why would you put yourself through that?
Well, because Cage, I just gotten up. I was gonna start cooking. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna watch some ball tonight because I thought we were recording last night. So I was like, okay, I'll watch some ball. I put on the Celtics, or I was looking for the Celtics game, couldn't find it. Had to watch it on my phone. Put the Raptors game up on my TV because it was on TSN. You know, I had the whole setup going. You know, and thank God I didn't watch most of the Raptors game because it was horrible. The offense was garbage, absolutely atrocious by the Toronto Raptors. Only way I can put it, Cage, is I don't know what the score is at half, but I know the score. What, sorry?
It was 50-47.
Okay, well, it was 50-48 with like 10 minutes left in the third quarter. So, like, they had started the third quarter and they were still basically at that score line. The Celtics at half had 77 points at half against the Washington Wizards. And again, it's Washington. They suck. But it's still 77 points, which is pretty sick. So, anyway, there are 3 undefeated teams currently, Cajun, in the NBA.
Yep.
Dallas Mavericks, surprising, but they haven't played anybody yet. We'll talk about that in a second. The Denver Nuggets, you thought they were going to take the regular season lightly. Oh, you simpleton, you. And then, of course, the best team in the NBA, the Boston Celtics, undefeated. The only undefeated team in the Eastern Conference. How about that?
The best team in the Eastern Conference, the best team in the league. I don't know about best team in the league.
Best team in the Eastern Conference for sure. Best team in the league, damn close. Damn close.
I still think Denver tops that list for me, but then again, they're the reigning champion, so there's that.
Yeah, you're also biased because you're a Raptors fan.
No, I've given the Celtics my due.
Stinky, rotten, no good Celtics fan. By the way, they also haven't played anybody yet. Like the Lakers, they were mediocre. Memphis has not won a game yet this year. Oklahoma City, you and I both like, but they're gonna have their growing pains still. And played Utah. They played nobody.
But the Thunder are 3-1, and the Nuggets basically wiped the floor with them.
Yeah, but that's a young team. You know, that's a young team. You know, you got.
But they are a good young team.
I agree. I agree with both of those statements. But still, you know, they're a young team. They are a young team, and you got to give them a chance to have games like this against the reigning defending NBA champs.
My issue, my like, I think the one thing with the Nuggets, I think like nobody might figure out for a while, is their starting lineup. Now they don't have the talent like the Celtics do, but the synergy and chemistry on both ends of the floor is unparalleled from their starting lineup. Obviously, you got the head of the snake in Nikola Jokic, a great second star in Murray, who could be the number one option on a lot of teams. Michael Porter Jr. finally now knows his role, rebounds, hits threes, does more of the little things than maybe we saw him in his early Nuggets days or at Missouri. Um, KCP knows his role, 3-and-D guy, and Aaron Gordon, who really has changed that Nuggets team for the better because he's played to his role, and he could be a lot better than, and he could do a lot more than he is. To me, to me, that's what Boston has to emulate. Like certain player, Drew Holiday needs to know his. Drew Holiday at the end of it has to play a la Aaron Gordon, or so does Derek White, and Porzingis has to adjust because Tatum and Brown are going to be your top dogs. So if Boston does emulate Denver to some degree, then talent-wise, that kind of overshadows Denver. But until that happens, Denver's a top dog until proven otherwise.
Well, Cage, I'm not sure if they proved it last night. Because I'm not going to say they did. Because, again, Washington sucks. Like, we can be honest, Washington might win 20 games this year. But the Celtics were up by as much as 30. They only won the game 126-107. But they were up big throughout that game, Cage. Going into the fourth quarter, it was well into a 30-plus point lead for the Celtics. The reserves kind of let it slip there in the fourth quarter. I think the Celtics had 108 by going into the fourth quarter. So I mean, they only scored about 20 points in the fourth quarter. So, that was disappointing. Like Peyton Pritchard going 0 for 8 from the field, that's disappointing. But 7 rebounds and 6 assists is really good. But like the Celtics, you got Jaylen Brown had 36. He had 27 in the first half. Jason Tatum, 33 points. Kristaps, 7 for 9 from the field. He had 15 points. D. White, 8 assists. Only shot the ball 3 times. Made 2 of them. Drew Holiday shot the ball 7 times. Made 4. Had 11 points with a block and a steal, and doing his defensive duties as Derek White does, and etc. So very impressive start by the go ahead.
Celtics look good.
They're doing what great. Not good, Kate. They look great. The starting lineup looks great.
The starting lineup does look great. I will agree with that. Can they continue this?
I think so. I think it is sustainable.
Because they have had some good wins. They have had some good wins. Washington, they took care of business, and that's what a great team is supposed to do: take care of business. Something these I don't even know how to do this without cussing. These bummy Raptors can't do against Portland. But that's beside the point. They struggled against the Knicks, but found a way to win. That's what great teams do. They took care of business against the Heat, although that game was a little bit closer than maybe Celtics fans would like. They pulled that one off, and they took care of business at Washington. I'm excited to see that game tomorrow against the Pacers, though, because that's going to be a fun one. But for all those worries about chemistry and can they get it together quickly, they figured it out. They figured it out. A regular season, mind you, I believe, and we've got a Celtics fan, like, and Spencer's a Celtics fan here. Somehow I had Boston at 1. So they're looking up to par at least for the regular season, and there's going to be games in which they're going to struggle because they're trying to figure out like what the hierarchy is. Now it's only been 3 games, but they're on the right track. The only issue for me is going to be, obviously, this goes for all 30 teams in the NBA. Health. Can they stay healthy over the grind of a regular season? And I feel like they need 1 or 2 guys to step up from the bench. because they're very top heavy. That really hasn't changed that much. Because Peyton Pritchard had a great preseason, but that hasn't translated into the regular season thus far. I think either him or someone or like Al Horford, someone else has to step up from that bench to kind of like ease the pressure off of the starters. But that's just like nitpicking at that point. They look great to start off.
That they do. A team that looks like absolute garbage to start this season is the Ja Morantless Memphis Grizzlies. They're 0-4 right now. Haven't been able to win a game. In fairness, they played against Denver. They played against Dallas, two teams that are undefeated, but losses to New Orleans and Washington, the aforementioned Washington Wizards. Definitely not what you want to see with a team that you already know is missing their best player and also missing Steven Adams for the season due to an injury. Definitely not the start you would have wanted to see from a team that was definitely hoping to continue to be the second best team in the West, which they were last year, but it has not been a good start down there in Memphis.
It hasn't, and I don't know how you feel about this, but damn, Marcus Smart be hurting right now. And to me, it just comes down to consistent scoring because they scored 104. Now, maybe if this was the early 2000s, they'd have a great. They'd have like a top 5 offense in the league. But we're not in the 2000s anymore. 104 points isn't going to cut it. And 106 against a sorry defensive team in the Wizards. That's not going to cut it. They don't like. You could talk about, okay, maybe defensively they're not the greatest. It's their offense that's the issue to me. And Jaren Jackson Jr. has been hot and cold to start off. Desmond Bane has had some good games, but I think he's had a clunker every now and then. Marcus Smart actually has not looked bad offensively to start off. But it also doesn't help when you don't have many. There's not many scoring options on this Memphis team because they're starting Xavier Tillman, and Tillman was never known for being a scorer. Case in point, last night against Dallas went 3 for 14. And I don't think the bottom has fallen off for the Grizzlies yet, because this is a whole other territory that they're in. They don't have ties. In past years they've been known as a team that has thrived with if John Morant is out, they can hold down the fort. But that was with Tyus Jones in the mix. He's not there anymore. So Zaire Williams is playing big minutes, and they've had to adjust to that, and they've had to make big adjustments. And so far, it hasn't paid off in terms of like the standing. So they have looked disappointing, but I don't think it's gonna get worse. I think the worst has happened, and I think they're going to figure it out and be close to 500 when John Morant comes back. But this isn't the start that you want if you're Memphis.
No, it's not. Another mentioned name for injury, Santi Aldama, who is a more offensive big, who'd probably be starting at center over Tillman, who's an undersized big. He's out right now, and he's, again, a really good offensive option, in my opinion. So him being out doesn't help. Brandon Clark being out doesn't help. Like, Memphis has been ravaged by injuries, too, including, obviously, John Morant's suspension and Steven Adams being out for the year.
I think Aldama is a better option for the bench because I'm looking at the bench stats right now. They only have 13 points off the bench. They need an offensive minded guy off the bench, and Aldama could easily be that guy.
They need a lot of things, Cage, right now. They need a lot of things. You'd say maybe they need John Morant, but obviously he won't be back for the next They played 4 games, so 21 games and counting. Another team that has not been able to win a game yet this season, the lowly Houston Rockets continue to be the lowly Houston Rockets.
So Dylan Brooks' current team and Dylan Brooks' former team.
Yeah, so Dylan Brooks' current and former teams are 0-7 right now in the year. So Dylan Brooks obviously is doing something wrong. But he was getting the bag. So you know what? In fairness to Dylan Brooks, he is getting the bag.
He's actually shot efficiently in those 3 games too, which is kind of crazy considering he's historically been known as an inefficient shooter.
Yeah, and same thing with Marcus Smart, ironically, as you mentioned that. Jabari Smith has probably been the biggest disappointment, I would say, for the Rockets. I know because he was on my fantasy team until I dropped him for the fantasy god that is Ben Simmons. Gotta wonder how long it takes for Amen Thompson to start starting for Ime Udoka and the Houston Rockets. But obviously, this is not a good team. Like, I think we all kind of know that this Houston Rockets team is not very good. But you got to hope that they're going to be able to kind of iron out some of these mistakes they're making, like Fred VanVleet shooting 37% from the field. Jalen Green's not been shooting efficiently well start off this season. Obviously, Sengun's fantastic. But other than probably Sengun and Brooks, you would say the rest of this Rockets team really needs to find its next gear if they want to make any push forward with this roster and all these young guys.
And I think that's the thing. They've added a lot of guys, so chemistry is still sort of an issue, and the young guys just have to shoot better and figure things out. Obviously, Jalen Green didn't really shoot the ball well last season to begin it off. Fred VanVleet didn't shoot the ball well at all last year, so not sure if that's really a surprise. I'd like to see Amen Thompson get some more minutes and take advantage of that and run with it like his twin brother Oscar has, who by the way has been playing absolutely amazing. I'm benefiting from that fantasy wise, but we'll get to him in a bit. But it's a new coach, new system, and players got to buy in their roles. And they're young, so egos do play a role in that, and do play a factor in that too. I don't think they're a play-in team. I think they're going to be near the bottom of the West because the West is just that deep. The West just has a lot of good teams, at least regular season wise.
That definitely is true. Now to the worst team in the East. Oh wait, Kate, you got something else to say?
But they'll figure it out. They'll figure it out to the point where it may not result in many wins, but they'll be better as the season progresses.
Well, on to the worst team in the East, a team that scored in their first 4 games 100 points in 2 of those 4 games, both of which were losses, might I add, are the Toronto Raptors, Cage. They have really struggled this season, especially on offense, in my opinion. Even though the passing has been up, the scoring hasn't been up. And it came to a head last night when they lose 99-91 to the Portland Trailblazers, giving Portland their first win of the season. And that season win is without Anthony Simons, who's probably their best player. Cage, I'm not really sure where to go with that after that, Cage. What'd you make of the game? What'd you make of the game last night?
Well, first of all, I'm glad. Well, they were down 1 with like 3:14 to go, and I'm like, they better not win this game. Like, by they I mean Toronto, and me being the Raptors fan out of all that. Because I'm like, you can't. To me, it's like you're better off losing a game like as a fan. I'm more content with them lose. Like, if it's a close game, I'd be more content with them losing than winning a close game against a team that you're supposed to be taking care of business against. So, now full credit to Portland. Shaedon Sharp played great. Portland does have NBA talent. Like, there's Brogdon as like the sixth man on that team, and he outscored the Raptors bench by himself, 21-17, which I think is the biggest issue. Which I think is the biggest issue because there's a couple of guys that have stepped up in terms of like roles. I think we've seen Scotty Barnes be more assertive on the offensive end and aggressive. Maybe not always to maybe to a greater degree than I would like. But there's some guy. But Scotty Barnes has looked good. Dennis Schroeder has looked good. Grady Dick has looked like he has belonged. But and you've said it yourself. They're passing the ball a lot more, but more turnovers. And I think that and I think it's and not only is it the turnovers, guys are trying to figure out their roles. And I think the elephant in the room has to be Pascal Siakam. Because we haven't seen a game in which he has taken over down the stretch. I don't think he's even scored 20 in any of these games. Maybe against Philly. Maybe against I'm just trying to look at this right now. I think he had 15 against Minnesota, 17 against Philly, 17 against Chicago, 11 against Philly. Oh, and he broke the 20-point mark, an even 20 points against Portland. He's shooting under 40% from the field and 28% from downtown. For a guy that's supposed to be the Raptors' best player, that can't happen. And I think and it's not the fact that he's shooting the ball poorly. There's times when he's on that. There's times that I've watched game. There's times that I've seen him on the floor in which he sort of like blends into the background. And I think hierarchy needs to be figured out. And yes, it's a new coach. Yes, it's a new system. Yes, Darko Rajakovic has to figure out what players can play in the system, and maybe it changes for each game based off of the matchups. But it's tough. It's been tough to watch them offensively. Now defensively, they've looked good. They've looked good for stretches, albeit not in the clutch when Brogdon blew by every time driving to the basket.
You didn't like Malcolm Brogdon cooking the Toronto Raptors last night?
I liked him fantasy wise because he dropped 21 for me. Might I add he was a free agent pickup, so there's that. But offensively, they got to know their roles. Roles have to be figured out, and I think that to me is the biggest issue, and the fact that teams don't respect Dennis Schroeder as a shooter. Might I add you, Dennis Schroeder is not a bad 3-point shooter, but he wasn't the same. But he isn't the same threat that Fred VanVleet was for Toronto. And I think this might get worse before it gets better. But there's going to be a ton of growing pains. But when things do click, I think they will click. I'm still optimistic that it will turn around, but right now it looks tough, at least offensively. Defensively, it hasn't looked too bad. They have made life difficult defensively for stretches, albeit there's still some inconsistencies on defense that need to be ironed out. But defensively, they haven't looked bad. Offensively, they've been atrocious, and And it comes down to players knowing their roles. Guys are trying to do too much, trying to go one on four by themselves, letting the whistle affect them. As much as the last 2 minute report against the Bulls would kind of infuriate Raptors fans, it should have never gone to that point in the first place. But they got to play. But right now, like offensively, and I think this might best describe it. I see a ton of individuals playing and not a team. When the going gets tough, they got to play like a team offensively. They're playing like a team defensively, but not when you have to put the ball in the bucket.
I think the one stat, Cajun, that says it all from last night's game against Portland, 4 for 29 from the 3-point line. That is basically 14% to be exact. It is 13.8% from beyond the arc. See, OG, Scotty, and Dennis Schroeder are the only 3 players that made a 3-pointer, OG making 2 of which in the game. So bad shooting night across the board, especially from behind the arc. And if you can't space the floor, you can't open up the paint. Just a sad reality of NBA basketball.
Now, to their credit, a lot of those looks were good wide open looks. I think there was like a possession in which they were down 1, and Scotty Barnes kicked it out to a wide open OG Anunoby in the corner, missed the 3, and next thing you know, Jeremy Grant hits a contested 3. So that kind of sums up how that game went. That sums up how that game went offensively. It's a make or miss league, and right now the Raptors are missing a lot more than they are making, and it's hard. Their place in the standings show exactly that.
Okay, that was a perfect transition of what we were going to go to next, but I do want to give you a chance to talk about this since you put it in our lineup. You put it on the phenomenon of Grady Dick here in Toronto.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
And the only reason why I'm bringing this up is because Kajan wrote it down. So I'm going to talk about it. Obviously, Cage, you work at MLSE, you work at Scotiabank Arena, where the Raptors and Leafs play.
Yep.
And apparently, from what you tell me, Cage, you can tell the audience. There's a lot of Grady Dick jerseys. A lot of number 1, not a Dick number 1 on the around the building.
Yeah, they
knew Toronto.
Grady Dick and the Raptors knew what they were doing with this. They knew what they were doing with this. And it just made me realize as I see the number of the amount of Grady Dick jerseys. I am not going to say just his last name on there because that is, we could say sus here, right?
I'm not going to fight you.
We'll say that's suspect. Say it's a little suspect. It made me realize.
I would prefer Cajun if you put it this way. The Ratatouille chef. Highly suspect, Cajun. Highly suspect.
Highly suspect. There you go. Toronto kind of looking a little highly suspect out here with the amount of Grady Dick jerseys. And man, now him as a player, theoretically, is what Toronto needs. And his off-ball movement has been imperative. He had a great game against Philadelphia. He didn't make his threes against Portland, but he looks like, and defensively, like heading into the draft, that was his biggest issue. But he hasn't looked bad. It's just shots haven't been falling enough for him. As aside from that Philly game. But the bigger thing with him is his last name. Because now commentators have to watch what they're saying when he's on the floor. Because, like, anything that sounds a little innocent, and Spence, I think, mentioned, like, earlier in our conversation, earlier, like, before we started recording this episode, Spencer mentioned a call from Matt Devlin that kind of like that people will say is highly suspect. But because of his last name, he's going to be a meme.
He already is a meme, Cage. There is no gonna be. He already is one. He's been one since he got drafted.
And when he got drafted, I'm like, oh boy, here come the memes. And I know how highly suspect Toronto mans are. So I'm like, this ain't gonna go well. And it hasn't. I'm like, bruh. I see the number of Grady Dick jerseys, and then I see one there. I'm like, okay there. I'm like, the phenomenon of Grady Dick has swept Toronto, I might say. But will he be a worldwide meme by the time his career is said and done? Absolutely.
Well, speaking of other rookies, Cage, that are actually playing well for their basketball teams, Brandon Miller is leading the way in points per game by any rookie at 17.3 a night. Wembanyama is just behind him, and then Chet Holmgren is number 3. Brandon Miller's not even starting yet for Charlotte. He is playing more minutes than both Wemby and Chet, but he's not starting like Wemby or Chet. But also to add to that, the difference here, I think, between Brandon Miller and a guy like Chet Holmgren is the defense. Chet Holmgren's averaging almost 3 blocks a game already for Oklahoma City, and I'm got to make sure I find this before I say it, because I want to say it, Cage, but I want to make sure I get the stat right. There it is. Against Cleveland, in Game 2 of the regular season, he had 16 points, 13 rebounds, and 7 blocks. Yeah. 7 blocks. My God.
And I literally saw an article, and literally, like, he was clamoring that he should have had more than those 7 blocks. He was calling out the statisticians.
Give me my blocks, statisticians. Give me my blocks.
I was like, God damn, Chet Holmgren, he had 7.
7's not enough, Kajan. He wants 8, 9.
He wants a triple double in blocks.
He wants to be the next Akeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, I guess I should say.
No, like, these rookies have started off great. There's one player that you forgot that you left out there, and I think I might have said this before. Austin Thompson.
I was just going with the point getters, Cage. Austin Thompson is 7th in points per game at 8.5 points per game. He's averaging 10.5 rebounds though, which is the most of any rookie. His shooting percentages obviously are low, but I believe, will fix that as the season goes on. He's also averaging 2.5 blocks per game. Is Austin Thompson with Detroit? He's also starting for Detroit. And his minutes are actually right up there with Scoot Henderson, who's also starting for Portland. And ironically, again, Brandon Miller still is averaging more minutes than everybody, not even starting for Charlotte. So Coach Clifford over there in Charlotte obviously wanting to get Brandon Miller involved, just not immediately.
I think eventually he will start.
You'd have to think.
I think it might have to take a Gordon Hayward trade for that to happen. And it could happen because I believe his contract is an expiring one. I gotta check that. I think Gordon Hayward's contract is expiring, so they don't have to worry about, like, the teams don't have to worry about, like, the contract that the cost of the contract and his injury history, because it's going to be. He'll be a free agent after the end of the season. But once that happens, the inevitable happens, you'll see Brandon Miller starting, and he surprised me. Because you would think with like some of the talent that Charlotte had coming into the season, you'd think Brandon Miller wasn't really gonna have a chance to like blossom at least to start off the season. That's also before Miles Bridges was issued a criminal summons. Um, and before Kai Jones got waived. But he showed that he has belonged, and those that scoring chops that that he showed at Alabama have translated over to the NBA so far. So good on Brandon Miller.
Good on Brandon Miller. Now, Case, our last topic of the show, and actually one more thing I do want to mention before we move on, is Scoot Henderson, who has started all 4 games for Portland, but he has really struggled this year. He only averages about 8 points per game. He's shooting abysmal. 33% from the field, 5% from 3. 5.6%. So that means he's made, what, 1 3 on attempts? As I go quick look at his game log. Let's run, Cage. 3 in 4 games. He has hit 1 3 out of, what is that? Oh God, actually. 10, 18. So he's 1 for 18 from the 3-point line is Scoot Henderson.
Damn.
So struggling is the current beater of Toronto, but current 3rd overall pick, Scoot Henderson.
I mean, and rookie point guards have notoriously started off slow for the most part. Especially given the keys to a franchise that doesn't have as much. Now, Portland does have a little bit of talent when you're talking about Jeremy Grant, Anthony Simons, and I think the Simons injury has kind of like has really hurt Henderson in terms of like his efficiency, because teams can just be more focused on Scoot in comparison, or like, with no disrespect to Shaden Sharp, and I love Shaden Sharp's game, but Shaden Sharp is in the same threat right now as Anthony Simons is, because Anthony Simons is more established as a scorer, just like in the NBA right now. But that could change soon if Sharp does step up. But teams are more locked in on him, and he's got that target on his back. And he was not known as a threatening jump shooter to start it off, at least from 3-point line, and that's translated to the NBA. Now I think he is going to get better, but there are going to be a ton of growing pains, especially playing for a rebuilding Blazers team, and they will struggle even more, because like guys like Malcolm Brogdon, you would think are going to be inevitably traded come trade deadline. I think he'll figure it out. I think it's too early to tell. Somebody said he was putting up G League stats, which I think is a little bit unfair, because it's just 4 games in. Like, and maybe this is an extreme example, but the great Kobe Bryant didn't have the greatest rookie season. Granted, he was 13th overall. It's a different sort of scenario.
He was also 18, so Scoot's got at least a year or 2 on him. But I understand the point you're making.
He didn't start off well. A lot of guards don't really start. A lot of rookie lead guards get off to slow starts. It's how you bounce back from adversity. And I think Scoot will figure it out. But I think the shooting struggles in terms of like from the 3-point arc will kind of persist throughout his rookie season, and that's an adjustment he's either going to have to make in season or come off season to his second year.
Well, he did have 7 assists and 2 steals in the win over Toronto, so maybe he is more moving into that passer role, which would definitely help out his stats if he moves into more of a passer role. But now, Cage, to end off the show.
Yep.
Many, many moons ago, Alain and I talked about the player participation policy, and he asked me who was going to break it first, Cage. And then I came on this show the very next day and said, Cage, Al asked me this question. What do you think? I said Philly, which now looks to be almost an impossibility. Al said Phoenix. You said Miami. I think Los Angeles now is a prime candidate to still break it, but as you and I mentioned a lot throughout when we first talked about it, then when we re-talked about it when Al brought up this particular who would break it first question, it's gonna get exploited like everything else, and it already has been being exploited. Already.
Yep. There's it's more so proven that like with all these players resting, like Jimmy Butler being one of them, um, some people from our graduating class of CSM called him Himmy Butler. I know you hate that term,
That I do.
but resting players ain't gonna change. They're just gonna find more sneaky ways to do it. They're gonna just hide it a lot better. Or you could have a team that just doesn't care, just pay fines. And there's got to be more of a structure in place. And I said it on our last episode. And maybe this might be bold, but I don't think Adam Silver does not have the same backbone that David Stern has. I think all this wouldn't have flied under David Stern. And I think another rule that's kind of like meant a lot of nothing has been the flopping tech. Because I lost count of how many flops I've seen and they've been called for fouls. So like, what are we doing here? Like there's a lot of rule changes, but they've amounted to a lot of nothing at the same time because you still got guys resting on like second night of back to back, which for some players it is kind of fair because of their injury histories. But it's still reared its head. Some teams do it blatantly, and there hasn't been significant punishment for it.
Okay, I'll be honest here. Looking at the NBA website, over half of these articles are injuries. Like Rui Hachimura eye injury, Kyrie Irving foot injury, OG Anunoby leg injury, Devin Booker injury, Precious Achiuwa injury, Aaron Fox injury, Draymond Green coming back from injury, Bradley Beal injury, Anthony Simons injury. Like it's getting to that point where I feel like guys are not necessarily faking injuries, but they're exacerbating. They're inflating their injury. You know, like it's tightness, and they're like, "Oh, I'll sit out tonight because I'm hurt," and they'll get that check mark because the doctor will write the thing saying it's a back tightness or whatever.
I think there's some players there that like don't warrant that because
I'm not saying everybody, Kate. I'm just saying I definitely think that's gonna happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's already happening.
Yeah, because I remember that Lakers Kings game in which Fox actually got hurt. He had no business playing overtime and tried to play overtime, and in the process might have made it a little bit worse. But I see your point. Like, I get what you're saying. It's an epidemic. It's
an epidemic.
It is an epidemic, and until there's like a structure in place in which there's like a set sort of rules, if you rest a certain time, if players start resting games, they get like I honestly think it should amount to suspensions. If you can play and
great,
you're
great,
not,
give him more rest, Cage. Give him more rest. Why not? Like,
No,
there really
but
is no way to win. In
huh?
my mind, there really is no way to win. Because it's like either you suspend them and they get more time off. You fine them, and they probably appeal the fine. You fine the
Or
team, and the team just eats it because they have a billionaire owner.
or players could just eat fines too if they're getting paid like 50 mil a year.
Yeah, but I think the CBA is low enough that it you know it really doesn't make much of a difference to the athlete. But
Yeah.
that's nor here nor there.
I think like maybe this is extreme, like, but like if 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 a player does not play and can play, either suspend the player like 3 or 5 games, or have the team lose a draft pick. Something something drastic has to change here. Something drastic that will make players and fans go, okay, what the actual, you know what? But what's happening right now ain't it. And it's like, it's not only taken away from the product of like an NBA game, like like in which it doesn't look the most competitive or the best brand, best product of NBA basketball. It's taken away from the fan experience too, because fans don't deserve to travel and shell out their money to see their favorite player only to find out that he's resting or that he's nursing an injury that he could easily play through.
And I also know they've tried to make it where you only rest at home, but that's even like as much as like yeah, they only go to certain places once a year, so obviously you want them to play in that once a year game if it's Tatum or
I still have
LeBron
that
or whatever. But that's their home fan. I get to see them 41 times, and you're telling me out of the 41 games they're gonna play at home, I get to see Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown together maybe 35, 34 times?
and that's if you're a season seat holder. What about the fans who can't afford that?
Yeah, the casuals, the little kids that are, are going for a birthday present or a Christmas present. And the game they happen to go to, Tatum's not playing. He's taking his sit, which again is his right, is his prerogative, but
I
it's
don't think
still the fan experience you're taking away from.
credit to guys like Tatum and Brown. I don't think they've done it. They've only done it like
Oh
maybe near
no.
the end of the regular season, end of the regular season, and that's warranted because like if you've already, it's warranted if you're resting near the end of the regular season, like with 4 or 5 games left when you've already clinched a spot, because it doesn't make any sense. It does not make sense to go logistically. It doesn't make sense to go hard at the end of the regular season when you've already clinched everything, and just to pick up an injury before playoffs start. So that sort of makes sense. But during the regular season in the middle, nah,
Or beginning like right now when the season's just
yeah,
starting.
it hasn't even been 2 weeks in.
That's why I'm confused because of all these injuries. How is Bradley Beal already hurt? How is Kyrie Irving already hurt? Guys, most teams have played what 3 and 4 games already. How is everybody already hurt? How is everybody already nursing stuff? Like, what are you guys doing all off season? Eating cookies? Like, what do you guys have my off season regimen of eating cookies and not eating right and not working out or anything? Like, what's going on here?
Like, it makes zero sense to me. And it's not only that rule. They introduced a flopping tech, and
They
yet I
did.
still see, and yeah,
I saw it a couple times in the Celtics game. I think the first one I saw, the first game of the year. Pardon us, we both had the sniffles, ironically. But they called it on Porzingis, and then they called it going the other way against the other team, and I'm not really sure. And my problem with that tech, honestly, Cage, they don't even really call it. They like flag it first, and then they blow the whistle and they call it because it technically is a technical. It's a flagrant one, so you get one free throw in the ball. But it's like really weird how they call it. So it's just really awkward. Not only that, it's also a judgment call, which you'll always have disagreements on for it being a flop or not being a flop or an embellishment or whatever you want to call
yeah. It's just like there's all these rules, and I feel like I'm being a tape recorder here. There's a lot of these rules that are being put in place, but unless they're enforced properly, they'll amount to a whole lot of nothing.
And there you have. So, Cage, you know what we're going to do? I was going to say what I thought they should do. But you know what we're going to do, Cage? That's going to be next episode. On Thursday, in 2 days' time for your regularly scheduled programming, Cage and you and I will start off the show, regardless of what happens in the next 2 days. You and I are going to start off the show with what we would do to fix the players' participation issue. The problem with players not playing enough games. You and I will come up with one or two rules to fix it. Because I don't think one rule would fix it. So we'll say one or two rules to try to fix the player participation problem in the NBA.
And maybe not to spoil things a bit, but I don't think it's just the NBA as a league that has to enforce this. Teams have to too.
Exactly. There has to be some sort of, I'll say, I hate the word culture in sports because it's overused, but that type of movement inside the locker room of, okay, guys, we're not just setting out games to set out games. So that's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we'll do that next episode. That'll be something we do. We talk about rules we would implement if we were the commissioner of the NBA, if we were the czar of the NBA. What rules would we implement to try to fix the player participation issue that has continued to play? And then we can maybe argue and bristle each other. Like, hey, I think your rule sucks, and here's why.
Yeah.
Because, that's always fun to do. But I think that's it, Cage. You got anything else before we run away?
Well, it kind of slipped out. It kind of slipped out of my mind at this time. Like, but let me actually see. I gotta shout out Chris Paul. We were talking about how Westbrook has let go of his ego and played to his role. Credit Chris Paul. Now, granted, it's been early, but until this season, he had not come off the he had not he's always started in his 19-year career, like since 2005. For the first time in his career, he's come off the bench. And give him credit, he has thrived. The Warriors have looked a lot better in terms of their bench. Guys are playing more empowered, like Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, Dario Saric. You mentioned Trace Jackson Davis, Podzimski. They're playing accordingly to their roles, and that's made this Warriors team more dangerous than they were last season. Now, can they make some noise in the West compared to the Nuggets? That remains to be seen. But shout out to Chris Paul, man. Like, it's not easy being an established type of player like he is and having to swallow your pride and come off the bench, but he's done it great so far, and the Warriors have looked good ever since losing their season opening game against the Suns.
Well, all I have to say is I picked him to win Sixth Man of the Year, and I feel very confident in that choice right now. But that'll be it here for us. What was that, Kajan?
And that you should be.
And that I should be. Well, I'll be here for us. For Kajan, Ruth, Danny Castle, I'm Spencer Byers. Thank you so much for taking us in here today. We'll be back for regularly scheduled programming on Thursday. I believe there will be an Outrage episode also out tomorrow, so do stay tuned for the Outrage tomorrow. Polar Opposites on Thursday. But for this Polar Opposite episode, thank you so much for tuning in on the Outrage Inc.